My sister was the town's golden girl. Sierra had the kind of charm that made people forgive anything. She was prom queen, a straight-A student, and the head volunteer at every local church fair. People used to joke that God must have made her on a Sunday morning with extra care. To my parents, she was everything they had ever wanted in a daughter. Beautiful, graceful, driven. They loved introducing her at every social event, flashing proud smiles whenever someone mentioned her latest achievement. Meanwhile, I was Amber, the younger sister who worked part-time at a coffee shop and struggled through community college. I knew my place in the family hierarchy. I was the afterthought. But behind closed doors, Sierra was not the angel everyone believed she was. She was cold, manipulative, and cruel in ways that were hard to explain. She never hit me where it would show. She used words like razors and hands like ropes. She knew how to twist the truth just enough that I always looked like the jealous one, the sensitive one, the liar. It started when we were young. She would take my things and then scream at me if I touched hers. If I ever told Mom or Dad, she would fake tears so well that I'd end up apologizing. Once when I was 10, she locked me outside in the rain for an hour just because I told her I liked her shoes. She said I was trying to copy her. That night, she told my parents I had been sneaking out and lying about it. I was grounded for a week. As we grew older, the abuse changed form. It became more subtle, more psychological. She would insult me in whispers while hugging me in front of our parents. She would sabotage my things, then help me clean up with a fake concern that melted hearts. No one ever suspected her. I stopped trying to explain. My parents thought we were close. They said Sierra looked out for me. They thanked her for always being a good sister. I nodded, smiled, and swallowed the bitterness. I became quiet, withdrawn. I stopped bringing friends home. I stopped trying to be seen. Because every time I spoke up, Sierra would find a new way to punish me without leaving a mark. Until one night, she tried to press a burning hot curling iron against my face. And that changed everything. My name is Amber Carter. I'm 22 years old, and I live in a quiet town tucked in southern Oregon, where everyone knows everyone, and reputations last longer than truth. I never stood out much. I work part-time at a coffee shop on Main Street, study part-time at a community college nearby, and live in a modest apartment with a roommate who mostly keeps to herself. I'm not flashy, not loud, not someone you'd remember after passing on the street. But that's fine. I never wanted the spotlight. That always belonged to Sierra, my older sister. She's 2 years older than me, but somehow always felt decades ahead. While I was still learning how to apply eyeliner, Sierra was interning at a law firm. She went to one of the top universities on the West Coast with scholarships and glowing recommendation letters from half the town. Everyone adored her. My parents in particular seemed to live through her success. Our living room walls were covered with her awards certificates, framed photos of her shaking hands with important people. There was barely a picture of me past middle school. Still, I tried not to resent her. It wasn't her fault people loved her, or at least that's what I told myself. Sierra knew how to play the game. She dressed like she was always ready for an interview. Her voice had this calm, calculated sweetness that made people trust her instantly, and she never let that mask slip in public. Ever. But behind closed doors, she was different. Sharp, controlling, always watching for a weakness to exploit. She thrived on dominance, especially over me. I don't know when exactly it started to shift from sibling rivalry to something more sinister. Maybe it was around high school. I got my first job at a bookstore when I was 16, and one night I forgot to pick up her dry cleaning after my shift. She cornered me in the hallway when our parents weren't home and yanked my hair so hard I saw stars. Then 5 minutes later, she was in the kitchen baking cookies and telling Mom how much she missed spending time with me. I stared at her in disbelief while Mom called us her sweet girls. Moments like that became routine. If I left my laundry in the washer too long, she would dump it out and step on it before tossing it on my bed. If I dared confront her, she'd make up something I supposedly said behind her back, and somehow I'd be the one apologizing. I started to live cautiously, measuring every move, every word. Home didn't feel like home. It felt like a stage, and I was constantly waiting for the curtain to drop. My parents, Michael and Denise, were both deeply involved in our local church. My father was on the church board, and my mother volunteered in Sunday school. They believed in forgiveness in order in not airing dirty laundry. So when I tried once to tell them Sierra had grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise, they said I must have misunderstood. They reminded me that sisters fight sometimes, that I was probably emotional, and that I should try to see things from Sierra's perspective. After all, she had so much on her plate. They always said that. Sierra had stress. Sierra had pressure. Sierra had the world watching. I was just supposed to understand. So I stopped talking. I smiled when she smiled. I played along. I became good at disappearing in plain sight. I left for college locally because I couldn't afford to go far and because a small part of me still wanted to believe things could get better. That maybe if I became more useful, more responsible, my parents would notice me. That maybe Sierra would stop treating me like an accessory to her life and start seeing me as a sister. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was just a prop in her performance. And no matter how much I tried to rewrite my part, she would always be the star. Sierra's cruelty didn't always look like violence. It wasn't always bruises or scratches. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was stealing little things and denying it until I questioned my own memory. My favorite hoodie disappeared one week, and 2 days later I saw her wearing it on a Snapchat story claiming it was a birthday gift from a friend. I asked her about it. She said I was being dramatic, that it was just a coincidence. I knew it wasn't. I knew she was playing with me. But what could I do? She'd look at me with that soft smile, the one she wore like armor, and suddenly I was the unstable one. I started documenting the little things. Notebooks hidden in my closet, photos of small injuries, recordings on my phone. It felt paranoid, but it was all I had. I needed something solid, something real to hold on to. There was one evening I'll never forget. I was home for spring break, and I had an interview for a better-paying job at a local office. I bought a blouse I couldn't afford and hung it up neatly the night before. In the morning, it was gone. I found it later crumpled and soaked at the bottom of the laundry basket. Sierra shrugged when I asked, said maybe I shouldn't leave things lying around. I went to the interview anyway, wearing a shirt I didn't feel confident in, and bombed it. That night I cried in the shower, not because of the job, but because I realized how small I'd become, how much power she had over my life. Sierra didn't need to hit hard. She just needed to hit often in ways that made me question my sanity. She was smart like that. She knew how to stay just within the boundaries of deniability. If I flinched when she reached for something near me, she'd laugh and call me sensitive. If I hesitated to speak at dinner, she'd fill the silence with a story that made me sound like a mess. My parents never questioned it. They thought I was just shy, awkward, not as put together as Sierra. And I played into it, retreating further into myself. Eventually, I moved out. I shared a small apartment with a girl named Dana who kept to herself and didn't ask questions. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had a lock on my bedroom door. I had space to breathe. I started sleeping better. I started drawing again, something I hadn't done in years. But I still had to go home sometimes. Holidays, birthdays, family dinners. That's when the game would start again. Sierra would hug me too tight, whisper insults in my ear, smile like a saint. Once during Thanksgiving, she tripped me on purpose while I was carrying a dish to the table. I spilled everything. Our mother gasped, rushed to help, while Sierra stood behind her, mouthing the word pathetic. My father told me I needed to be more graceful, that Sierra had been helping in the kitchen all morning, and I should learn from her. That was the night I started saving voice memos. I recorded everything I could, little snippets, conversations, moments when her tone shifted. It became a kind of obsession, a safety net. I didn't know what I was building exactly, but I knew I had to build something. I started therapy paid for out of pocket. I didn't talk about Sierra at first. I talked about stress, about work, about insomnia. But after 3 sessions, my therapist gently asked me who I was afraid of. I couldn't answer. I just cried. She said something that stuck with me. Sometimes survival looks like silence, but healing requires voice. That week, I upgraded my phone's storage and backed everything up. I created a folder titled Just in Case. Every time Sierra sent me a passive-aggressive message or made a veiled threat, I saved it. I didn't respond. I didn't engage. But I documented. I waited. And part of me hated that. I didn't want to be someone who waited for her sister to mess up. I wanted to be someone who moved on. But the truth was, Sierra wouldn't let me move on. and everything came to a head on my dad's birthday. I hadn't planned to go home. Dana and I were supposed to have a quiet night with takeout, but Mom called, said it would mean a lot to Dad if both his girls were there. So I went. I dressed nice. I brought a gift. I even smiled when I walked in the door. Sierra was already there dressed in a silky green blouse, pouring wine like she was hosting a fundraiser. She kissed me on the cheek, leaned in close, and whispered, "Don't embarrass yourself tonight. You know how fragile Dad is." I bit my tongue and took a seat. Dinner went as expected. Sierra told stories. My parents laughed. I nodded along. But something shifted when my dad complimented my new job. It wasn't a big deal. Just a small office assistant role. But he said he was proud of me, that I was becoming more confident. Sierra's smile faltered for half a second. Then she raised her glass and said, "To Amber, finally getting it together." The tone was light, but I heard the venom underneath. Later that night, after everyone went to bed, she came into my room. Her smile was gone. She closed the door behind her and said, "You really think you're something now, huh?" I stood my ground, told her to leave. She didn't. She walked toward me slowly, hand behind her back. I felt the old fear creep in. Then I saw it. She was holding her curling iron. She held the curling iron like it was an extension of her own anger, the cord dangling loosely as if it had a mind of its own. It was still plugged in. I could see the faint orange glow at the tip, feel the subtle warmth radiating even from across the room. I took a step back, bumping into my nightstand. My voice cracked as I told her to put it down. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You always think you're the victim, don't you?" she said. "Like I'm the villain in your sad little story." I didn't answer. I didn't move. My heart was beating too loud, my throat too tight. She stepped closer. "You've been turning everyone against me, haven't you?" she hissed. "With your quiet little sob stories, your sad eyes and mousy voice. You've always been jealous of me." "That's what this is." I shook my head slowly, more to keep myself grounded than to deny her accusations. I wanted to scream, to push her away, to run, but I knew better. I had seen what she could do when she felt cornered. Sierra raised the curling iron slowly like she was measuring the distance. Her hand trembled slightly. I don't think she even knew what she wanted to do. Hurt me. Scare me. Prove something. She took one more step forward, lifted the iron toward my face, and in that split-second instinct took over. I ducked. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't planned. My knees gave out and I dropped low just as she swung. I heard the sound before I saw it. A hiss. A scream. Then a sickening thud as the iron clattered to the floor. Sierra fell backward, clutching her neck, her eyes wide with shock, a red patch already blooming across her skin. The smell of burning flesh hit me a second later. She had missed me, but not by much. The iron had pressed against her collarbone right at the base of her neck. She was still screaming when I scrambled to my feet. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and called 911. 111. My voice was barely audible, but the dispatcher understood. They sent an ambulance immediately. I stayed with her even though every part of me wanted to run. She was curled on the floor, sobbing, gasping for breath, clutching her skin like she could stop the pain through sheer force of will. Our parents came rushing in moments later, eyes wide with confusion and fear. My mother dropped to her knees beside Sierra, trying to pry her hands away to see the injury. My father stood frozen. I didn't speak. I just pointed to the curling iron on the floor and then to my phone. I said, "Check her phone." That's all. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They moved quickly, professionally bandaging the wound, asking questions, taking notes. Sierra was in too much pain to lie. She just kept repeating, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." At the hospital, they separated us. A nurse took me to a small waiting room while they worked on her. I sat there alone, still holding my phone. It felt heavier than it ever had before, like all the weight of what it contained was pressing against my palm. A police officer arrived around midnight, then another. They asked me to walk them through what happened. I told them everything, and then finally I opened the folder I had been building for years. Just in case. Screenshots, audio recordings, photos, dates, times. Messages from Sierra, sometimes cruel, sometimes mocking, sometimes downright chilling. Evidence of bruises, images of destroyed belongings, voice memos of whispered threats. The officers took their time. One of them, a woman with tired eyes and a tight jaw, flipped through the files in silence. The more she saw, the stiffer her posture became. When she finally looked up, her voice was cold. Why didn't anyone stop this? I didn't know how to answer. Because no one believed me, because Sierra was perfect and I was invisible, because even now I felt like I had done something wrong. My parents were called in next. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years in one night. My father was pale, his hands shaking. They didn't speak to me. Not really. My father asked what happened, but I just told him to wait for the detectives. When they saw the evidence, their faces changed. My mother cried. My father sat down like the weight of it all had crushed his spine. They didn't deny it. They didn't try to explain it away. For the first time in my life, they saw what I had been living through. And it broke them. A social worker named Lila arrived the next day. She was soft-spoken but firm, and she explained everything calmly. Because I had been a minor for part of the documented abuse, the case involved Child Protection Services. Because Sierra was an adult, there were potential charges, but everything depended on the investigation. In the meantime, they enforced strict boundaries. Sierra was not allowed near me. We would both undergo separate counseling. Family therapy might be considered later, but only if I agreed. I didn't. Not then. Sierra needed surgery. The burn was severe. They had to graft skin from her thigh. Her neck was bandaged heavily, and she couldn't turn her head without pain. For weeks, she stayed in the guest room at home, our mother taking care of her around the clock. I didn't visit. I stayed with Dana. I kept going to work to school pretending that I was fine, but I wasn't. I felt like my entire life had been flipped inside out. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. One afternoon, I went back to the house to collect some things. My father was home sitting in the den with the television on mute. He looked at me like he didn't know who I was. "I think we all failed you," he said quietly. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. The damage was done. In the weeks that followed, Sierra started therapy. It was court-mandated. I heard she was angry at first, resistant, but something shifted. She stopped posting on social media, stopped calling friends. When I finally saw her again, it was by accident. I had gone to the grocery store near our neighborhood, and she was there wearing a scarf around her neck despite the warm weather. She didn't see me at first. She was moving slowly, carefully, like her body had betrayed her. And when she turned and our eyes met, I saw something in her face that I had never seen before. Shame. After the hospital, everything moved fast. The police opened an official investigation. The officers came to our house to collect statements, and for once, I didn't have to beg anyone to believe me. The files on my phone spoke louder than I ever could. They interviewed my parents separately. They spoke to my old teacher's neighbors, even the pastor at our church. Everyone had stories about Sierra. None of them were violent, but patterns began to emerge. People recalled how Sierra controlled conversations, how she shut me down in subtle ways, how she always seemed to decide who was included and who was ignored. It wasn't proof of abuse, but it painted a picture. The bruises, the recordings, the messages, those were the real proof. Lila, the social worker, stayed in contact with me. She said my case wasn't rare. Sibling abuse was more common than people thought, especially when it came in quiet forms that were hard to name. She said I had been brave to document everything. I didn't feel brave. I felt exhausted. But I kept showing up, to meetings, to therapy, to interviews. Meanwhile, Sierra was confined to the house. Her injuries were healing slowly. The skin graft had taken, but the scarring was severe. She couldn't wear her usual low-cut shirts anymore. She couldn't look in the mirror without flinching. I didn't feel sorry for her, not exactly. But I didn't feel triumph either. The victory felt empty. I didn't want revenge. I had just wanted it to stop. My parents were stuck in limbo. My mother moved like a ghost, going from Sierra's room to the kitchen to her own bed in silence. My father stopped attending church. He spent his time gardening, which he hadn't done in years. I saw them differently now. Not as enemies, but as people who had failed. people who didn't know how to admit it. The district attorney reviewed the evidence. Sierra wasn't charged with assault because the injury was ruled accidental, but the documented pattern of abuse meant mandatory intervention. She had to attend an anger management program twice a week for a full year. She had to participate in individual therapy and family counseling. I was offered the option to testify in a civil case if I wanted to pursue damages. I declined. I didn't want money. I wanted peace. Part of the court agreement included monitored family sessions. I agreed to one. Just one. I didn't want healing. I wanted acknowledgement. The therapist, a woman named Colleen, had warm eyes and a steel spine. She didn't let anyone deflect. She asked hard questions. Sierra sat across from me wrapped in a loose sweater, her neck still discolored. She didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Then quietly, she said she didn't remember half the things I brought up. Not because they didn't happen, but because they hadn't mattered to her. That was the moment I cried. Not out of pain, but out of clarity. I had spent years carrying moments that she had forgotten, like they were nothing. That night, I went home and deleted the folder. Just in case. I didn't need it anymore. I had already survived the worst. Sierra changed in ways I never expected. The scars on her neck were the most visible part, but it was something deeper that shifted. She stopped talking in rooms full of people. She no longer filled the air with her confidence. Her friends stopped visiting. She left group chats. Her Instagram, once filled with curated perfection, went silent. Sometimes I saw her from afar when I came by to visit my parents. She moved slowly, deliberately, like someone learning how to be in her own body again. I watched her one afternoon in the backyard standing over a flower bed. She bent forward to pull weeds and froze, wincing. Her hand went to her neck instinctively. She was alone. No audience. No performance. Just pain. Another day, my mom mentioned she'd found Sierra crying in her room. Not out of anger or manipulation, but from the weight of it all. Guilt. Shame, the realization of what she'd become. I didn't know what to do with that information. I had wanted justice, not her collapse. In therapy, I talked about that confusion. My counselor said it was normal, that when people who hurt us begin to hurt themselves, it stirs something we're not prepared for. Compassion, grief, sometimes even guilt. I didn't want to feel bad for Sierra, but I did. Not because she deserved it, but because I knew what it was like to feel alone. She started writing in a journal. My mom told me she was doing all her assignments from therapy. Sierra had always been good at homework. This time it was different. There were no grades, no praise. Just the slow grind of self-awareness. One evening, I went by the house to pick up a package. Sierra was in the kitchen making tea. She looked up when I entered but didn't speak. I hesitated. Then she said quietly, "I know you hate me." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I don't hate you." "You should," she replied. "I've been horrible. I've known it for a long time. But I didn't want to stop. It made me feel powerful." I looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes were sunken. Her voice wasn't steady. She looked like someone who had survived a storm of her own making. I nodded once, then left without saying more. That night, I dreamed of us as children before things turned dark, before she decided I was someone to control instead of someone to protect. I woke up crying. Not for her, for both of us. I moved forward slowly. There was no sudden healing, no dramatic transformation. It was just small steps. I applied for a full-time position at a local nonprofit that focused on youth mental health. I got it. I started saving for my own place, something quiet somewhere with light. I kept going to therapy. I kept showing up for myself in ways I never had before. One evening, I received a letter from Sierra, handwritten. The words were shaky, uncertain. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted me to know that she had been reading about emotional abuse and finally saw herself in the stories. She said it made her sick. That was the word she used. Sick. I read the letter twice and then put it in a drawer. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. A few weeks before my birthday, I saw her again. She was standing outside the community center where I worked, looking unsure. I stepped outside and she looked up at me. I thought about walking past her, about pretending she wasn't there, but I didn't. I stopped. She asked if we could sit. We walked to a nearby bench, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just hoping you'll let me try to be better." I didn't give her an answer. I just said, "Trying is a start." That was enough. She didn't push. She got up and left. I sat on that bench for another 20 minutes just breathing. On my birthday, I didn't go home. I spent it with Dana and a few coworkers eating cake from a paper plate and laughing without fear. It wasn't extravagant, but it was real. For the first time in years, I felt safe. A few months later, my parents invited me for dinner. Sierra would be there, they said, but they understood if I declined. I surprised myself by accepting. When I arrived, she was already seated, a book in her lap. She looked different, quieter, not broken, just softer. Dinner was careful but not tense. We talked about neutral things: weather, work, books. At the end, as we stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Sierra turned to me and asked, "Do you think we'll ever be normal again?" I thought about lying, about saying yes, but I didn't. I said I don't know, but maybe we can be something different, maybe better. She nodded. That night driving home, I thought about how pain shapes us, how it distorts and hardens, but also how it can teach us where our limits are, where we begin and others end. I no longer needed Sierra to validate my pain. I had already survived it, and now I was building something new from the wreckage. Not a perfect life, but a real one where I was no longer afraid to take up space.